Top 3 Scariest Haunted House Horror Stories You Won't Want to Hear. You're about to hear something that will change you forever. Something you can never unhear. Something that will crawl under your skin and follow you into the darkness. But before we begin, if you have the nerve to continue listening, subscribe to my channel. Because once you've heard this, there's no turning back. You'll be part of this story. You'll feel it. Now brace yourself. Here are the top 3 haunted house stories, and believe me, you don't want to hear them. But you need to. Story 1. The Family That Never Left. A family of 4 decided to settle into a remote, charming old house on the outskirts of a forgotten town. The price was unbeatable, way too low for the condition of the house. They thought they were just lucky, but that feeling faded the first night. The sounds started small, whispers, faint as if someone were standing just outside their bedroom doors, talking in a language they didn't understand. The lights would flicker, but only when they were alone, making them feel like they were being watched. It was as though the house itself was waiting for them to settle in. Then came the visions. At first, they thought it was stress, too much work. But one by one, they began to see shadowy figures moving in and out of the corners of their eyes. Their son, Billy, was the first to speak about it. He told his parents about the man with no eyes, who stood at the foot of his bed each night, staring at him, never speaking but just watching. One night, after hearing his terrified screams, his parents rushed to his room. The door was locked from the inside. When they finally broke it down, the room was empty. Billy was gone, vanished. No sign of struggle, no evidence. Just nothing. The walls were covered in a strange, sticky substance. The family searched for days but found nothing. And then it happened again. The night after Billy's disappearance, his father woke to the sounds of his voice calling from the basement. His father rushed down, but the moment he stepped onto the stairs, he felt the temperature drop. A cold, unnatural cold that froze his bones. He found a pile of clothes, a set of small, bloodied footprints, leading to the dark corner of the basement. But there was no Billy. Only a message scrawled on the wall in what looked like blood. "We're waiting for you." The family ran. But no matter where they went, no matter how far they drove, they could never escape. The whispers followed. And those dark figures? They were waiting for them, always. Story 2. The House That Chose Its Victim. There is a house in the middle of nowhere, hidden behind a wall of overgrown trees. Some say it was never meant to be lived in, that the land was cursed long before the house was built. The original owners died under mysterious circumstances, one after another, each death more gruesome than the last. When Rachel and her boyfriend Mark decided to rent it for the weekend, they thought it would be fun. A remote cabin to relax, away from everything. They didn't know what they were getting into. On the first night, they heard a faint knock on the door. They assumed it was the wind, but when they opened it, they found nothing but darkness stretching out into the trees. It wasn't until later that night that they began to notice the footprints on the floor, tiny, wet, and not theirs. It wasn't until Rachel found the room hidden behind a false wall in the back of the house that things turned terrifying. The room was small, with a single chair in the center. The air was thick, suffocating. But the most horrifying part? The chair was covered in dried blood, and there were fresh scratches on the floor, as though someone had been dragged across it. That's when the whispers started. Low at first, then louder, urgent. They were no longer alone. Someone, or something, had been waiting for them. Rachel tried to escape, but the door slammed shut behind her. The house was alive. The walls pulsated like they had a heartbeat, and the floorboards creaked under unseen footsteps. She could hear Mark screaming from somewhere in the house, but when she ran to find him, she found only his lifeless body, eyes wide with terror, fingers clawing at the walls as though he had been dragged. The house chose her next. It was now her turn to sit in the chair. Rachel knew in that moment she was no longer escaping. The house had marked her. And as she was pulled toward the chair, she could hear the whispers again, louder than ever, now all around her. Story 3. The Woman Who Never Left. In an isolated mansion at the edge of town, there was a woman, an old widow, who had lived there alone for decades. The townspeople avoided the house. They said it was cursed. When a young couple, newly married, decided to stay in the house for their honeymoon, they thought it would be quaint, charming even. They rented the place for a week, looking forward to the solitude. But they soon realized that something was wrong. The woman's portrait, hanging in the entryway, would sometimes be found moved, just slightly, always facing the door as if it were watching them. But that wasn't the worst part. It was the noises. At night, they could hear footsteps upstairs, slow and deliberate, as if someone was walking around in the dark. The first time they investigated, they found nothing. But on the second night, they heard the unmistakable sound of something dragging, something heavy, across the floor upstairs. When they opened the door to the attic, they found the woman standing there. Her back to them, unmoving, staring out the window at the stormy sky. But she was not dead. As they approached her, the cold in the room became unbearable. The temperature dropped so fast that their breath formed visible clouds in the air. They tried to call out to her, but she turned slowly. Her eyes, hollow black pits, stared at them with an intensity that made their hearts stop. "You shouldn't have come." Her voice echoed in their minds, louder than anything they could hear with their ears. Suddenly the door slammed shut. The room was pitch black. And then the whispers began. Not from the woman, no. From inside their own heads. It was as if the house itself had possessed them. They were trapped. The woman was no longer there. But she had left something behind. Something had marked them. And they would never be able to escape. You've listened this far. And now, something knows you, something has followed you. The house you thought you were safe from is not just a story anymore. It's watching you. You've been warned. And now, you've invited it in. So, before you turn away, if you want to survive this, if you want to know what happens next, subscribe. Because the nightmare isn't over. You'll never be alone again.